Okay, so the next section was using the quadratic formula. In the previous unit we looked at factoring questions that were similar to these. If you can't factor a question, of course, the idea is we can then go to the quadratic formula. You see it there in front of you in many different times. Now, I would say that on two of these examples, the first one here and the last one, there is another option, and I might prefer to solve this without the quadratic formula. So I'm going to do the first one that way and then do the second one with the quadratic formula. So when I look at this, I see that it can be factored first, and although I recognize not everybody's always comfortable factoring, this one is a fairly easy one to factor, and so I think it's probably a good idea. I'm looking for a common factor here. Always, that's the first step when I do that. When I do factoring, I always look for that common factor first. 2x squared minus 8x, there is a common factor of 2x. And so essentially I'm factoring the 2x out of each part. I'm left with an x here, and then a minus 4 here. Now remember, when I factor out, what I'm doing is rewriting the question in another form, so that if I did the opposite, if I did multiply here, 2x times x would get me back to the 2x squared. 2x minus 4 would get me to that negative 8x. And now because I have a solving that I'm doing here, that means I have an equation. I know that these two things multiply to 0, which means that either this first part must be 0 or the second part must be 0. The second expression here must be 0. And so if this times this is 0, one possibility is that 2x is 0, which means of course x would be 0. The second possibility is that x minus 4 is 0. I didn't really need the brackets there. And if x minus 4 is 0, we can treat this like a small equation. Add 4 to both sides, I get x minus 4 plus 4, 0 plus 4, x is 4. Okay, so that's actually the solved version of this equation. Now, if we had wanted to do it with the formula specifically, we still can do that. What I tend to do, or what I tend to show when I'm doing these, is because I'm going to be substituting in for a, b, and c, I'm just going to take them out of my equation right off the bat, and then I'm going to put brackets in order to make sure I don't mess up with my negative signs here. Okay, so as I'm going across the equation here, negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. My intention is to include that on your test, so you don't necessarily have to remember it, although I would assume by now everybody would. My b value in my equation, so this is a. A is always the coefficient of the x squared. B is always the coefficient, in this case negative 8, of the x term, and c is the number, the coefficient, or so the constant value on the end here. Over here, this will be the c value. In this one, 0 is the c value. And so as I go across here, a is 2, so I need a 2 right there and a 2 right there. Negative 8 is b, and you can sort of see where the brackets come into play now. I had negative b, now I have a negative, and then negative 8 is my value for b. So it sort of makes sure I don't confuse the fact that there are actually two negative symbols here, a minus, a negative if you will, and that will become positive momentarily. And of course the c value is 0, and so essentially a 0 is going to go in here. Now if I want to finish this up, I can do it fairly quickly. X is equal to, and this is negative 8 or minus negative 8. If I'm taking away negative values, I'm becoming positive. In here I have negative 8 squared, which is 64, and so I'm going to end up with root 64. This part over here, minus 4 times 2 times 0, is just going to be a 0, and so root 64 is is all that's left in here, and the denominator is 4. 8 plus or minus, and root 64 now is going to be, square root of 64 is 8, and so I have x is going to be either 8 plus 8 divided by 4, or x is going to be 8 minus 8 divided by 4. And of course this is 16 divided by 4, which is 4. This is 0 divided by 4, which is 0. So precisely what we got above. I think it should be fairly clear that the top solution was a little bit nicer, a little bit easier. But certainly you're going to get the right answer in the bottom as well. And so my rule basically for questions like this is, if I'm asking you to solve something, then you can solve it in whichever way is easiest for you. If I'm asking you specifically to factor something, then I expect to see you to factor it. Okay, so there will be questions on the upcoming test that say factor this, and in that case you have to factor, and then there'll be some that just say solve, and you solve it in whatever way you want. And any word problems, of course, same sort of thing. If you get to the point where you need to use the quadratic formula, you use it. If you choose to factor one of those questions, then that's fine as well. Okay, so I'm going to go through this one much quicker now. Now that we have seen one, I should be able to do this. And again, keys here, the a value is the coefficient of the x squared, the b value is the coefficient of the x, and the c value is the constant on the end. In this case, negative 15, here positive 1, and here positive 2. And so going across, my b value is 1, my a value is 2, and my c value is negative 15. And I certainly didn't leave myself enough room to squeeze in negative 15 there. And now from here it's pretty much mental math or calculator work, depending on how tough the numbers are. I see a negative 1 plus or minus, and here I have 1. Over here this is 8 times 15. 8 times 15 is 120. So I have 1 plus 120. And over 4. Oh yeah. Negative 1 plus or minus. This is the square root of 121, which is 11. And as we finish up, I get negative 1 plus 11, which is 10 quarters, or negative 1 minus 11, which is negative 12 quarters. And so I guess for our purposes, simplifying here, we get 5 halves, or 2.5. And simplifying here, sorry, I forgot my equal sign, x is negative 3. So I won't do the last one. I won't do it as a quadratic formula anyways. Again, looking at it, it's pretty similar to g in that this can be factored. It doesn't factor super nicely, but it does factor. So I have 5x squared minus 11x. So my feeling is on this one, if I factor out the x, this will be the quickest solution. Common factors x, I'm left with 5x minus 11, and the exact same argument as last time. That means that either x must be 0, because this part must be 0, or this part must be 0. It's an equal sign in there. Which means that 5x, I add the 11, to both sides. I end up with 5x equals 11. Divide both sides by 5. And so 11/5.